Hi everyone, my name is Vidya Math and I'm an author. And today I would like to ask you how you are. I hope the sun is shining for you and that you're having a good day. Today I have a topic for you regarding writing books, and the topic is editing. So let's dive straight into it. What is editing? Editing is anything we do to change some content after we have written it. And so when we start writing a book, we will put down the first draft or the first content that we have for that book in the shape that it's going to be. So not our little notes and things that we made before we started writing the book, but this is actually after we've started putting it down as the book. So when do we edit, and do we need to edit? So firstly, yes, we do need to edit. It's very rare that anybody would be able to pen a work and the work would be perfect in its wording or its content or what it describes the first time you put it down. So you might get 90% of it that is as you want it to come across. However, there's going to be perhaps 10% or much more than 10%, sometimes even 100%, where you would like to change something. So when do we make those changes? We could theorize that, do you write a chapter, for example, and then go back and edit the chapters? So say your book has 20 chapters in it. When do we actually do the editing? I would heavily recommend, having written quite a few books, that you edit after you have written your book. And that could strike the fear into people. It's especially if your book is very large. However, the reason I say this is when you are editing, you are reading your book through and you're checking it. You're checking it for continuity. You're checking it for mistakes in it. And those mistakes could be something that doesn't line up later in the book with something at the beginning of the book, for example. You're also checking, of course, to see if any wording needs to be changed a little bit, amended a little bit. When you have an overview, so when you are reading the book from the top right to the end, you have an overview, which you do not have if you are checking chapter by chapter. So if I wrote a first chapter of a book and I go back and I check the spelling and I check that the words are correct, what I don't have is whether or not what I've written there lines up with, say, what's coming in chapter 20, if it needs to line up with that. And that's the overview that's very important when we're editing, because we might notice after we've written our first draft that certain things don't match up. So when we are editing, one thing that if we can try and avoid is to leave big gaps between our editing, within our editing process. So if we start to read our book, so we've written the first draft and then we think we're going to proofread the book. Do we take the book and do a little today, and maybe a couple of weeks down the line we read the next part of it to check that? That I would say is not a good idea. It's very difficult when we're all so busy and we probably have jobs that we need to be at. We probably have family lives that we need to see to. And we may not have a lot of time where we can think, okay, I am going to sit down and do this work and read my 80,000 word book this week and next week, because people might just not have that kind of time. So how do we deal with those kind of time issues? What I would say is try to find some time where you know that you're going to have a bit of time every day. If it's a short book, you may only need 4 or 5 days. And if it's a longer book, you might need much longer than that. But what I would recommend to avoid is to have big gaps when you're editing, because you'll forget what was in your chapter 1. you'll forget what was in your chapter 2. So you want to kind of be reading it in a way when you're editing that gives you that continuity, gives you that feel of the book. When we're writing very large books, we may have written them over several years and things may have changed. You might notice that when you're reading the earlier chapters, that something is different in them to later chapters, and that's fine. But where we do need to draw continuity, we want to be able to see that when we're editing. We want to be able to see if we need to change something. So that's a little bit of recommendation. So other people that will be editing your work, you may have a proofreader, and I have some tips about when to involve the proofreader and also who to involve as a proofreader. So if you're a publisher, you may not get much say in who your proofreader is going to be. So I would recommend, firstly, when you write your book, if you're submitting it to your publisher, proofread it beforehand. Don't submit your first draft. The reason I say this is because as much as we might think, yeah, it looked fine while I was writing it, you'd be amazed when you go back, because when we are in writing mode, creative writing mode, we're in a different world if we're writing a creative book, a fiction book, something like that. Or even if we're writing a non-fiction book, we still might be in the flow. We're in a flow that doesn't need to check for spelling mistakes, doesn't need to check the wording at that point in time, because in fact that would be really disruptive to the process. And this is another reason why I would recommend that you don't edit while you're actually writing and save it up for after you've written. So when do we involve the proofreaders? So after you've written your first draft, please proofread it, and proofread it as I'm suggesting to you, which is when you know that you're going to have a bit of time each day for the next 2 weeks or whatever, so that you can get that continuity. Don't give your book to someone before proofreading it yourself, because people can interpret. If we have a proofreader come into the situation, that person is not you, and their interpretation of what you've written can be quite different, as in not because you put it across in a way that makes it puzzling, but there are certain words and things that we may have chosen to use that the proofreader may not have come across wording like that before, or you may have, and we need to do this sometimes, have used new words or new ways of writing. And if you have proofread your book, then you have more solid ground to be able to know yourself that the book you submitted was really what you wanted to put across. So when a proofreader comes along and makes changes, you can then more easily assess those changes and be able to see, well, do I want to accept any of these changes? They might have changed the wording a bit. The other thing that I would say about proofreaders, if you're in a position where you can pick a proofreader, let's take the English language. So I write in the English language most of the time, not always, but most of the time I write in the English language. So English is a language that's spoken in so many places in the world, and it is spoken differently in different parts of the world. So if I write a book, I may have picked a style, maybe not consciously picked a style, but the book itself needs to be in a certain style, and it may be in a style of writing that I'm either familiar with or a style of writing that has come about because of the book. This is something that the author knows. Now, the further you get from you, so if you bring in a proofreader, the further that person is from you in terms of how they think and the type of language that they speak. So within your own language. So let's say, for example, it is English. If I end up with a proofreader who comes from a completely different part of the world, who has a completely different history, who's probably read completely different books, has different influences, and maybe doesn't even get my style of writing, they may rework the book in a way that is not only shocking to the author, but it might also then be extremely onerous and difficult for the author to then go back and fix. So this is something we want to avoid right at the outset. So I would recommend, if possible, to select a proofreader that you think is going to be able to match the language that you have written your book in. So for me, I'm from Scotland in the UK. So perhaps somebody who was maybe brought up close to where I was brought up and who knows English would be maybe a good person to proofread my books. This is something that I haven't tried and tested. However, what I do know is that somebody from a different country, when they proofread my books, then I have to go back and fix everything, not because necessarily what they have done is incorrect, but the English that they are used to is not the English that I am used to. So those are some suggestions about proofreading. So at what point, if you do give your book to a publisher, the reason I've said to proofread it first is, of course, to ensure that the proofreader at least can get a good handle on your book. Proofreading by somebody else should come after your first proofread. That's a good point in time to have somebody else proofread your book. And then what happens from there? You review it again. So if somebody has proofread your book, you mustn't think to yourself, okay, that's fine, now it's ready to be published, because you need to see what's happened to your book and approve it and see what the changes are that a proofreader might have made. So read your book again, give at a time when you know that you will have consecutive days where you can actually read your book. And then if you have a few tweaks and things to make to it, again, don't send it back to the publisher, or don't just accept the changes and publish your book at that point in time. Accept the changes and then read it again. That can be an extremely lengthy task if we're talking about reading and rereading your book maybe 4 or 5 times, 6 times before it actually gets published. There's a temptation there, and there's a very real temptation there, that you kind of think at some point, okay, that's fine, let's just have this published. But once something is in print and out there, you can't change it. So it's really worth its weight in gold to change it beforehand if you need to. So make sure that the final version that you read is one that you would be happy to see in print. And that might sound simple for me to say it. You might wonder, why am I saying it? It's so obvious. It's because if you are reading lengthy books time after time after time, of course you get sick of it. Your books might be fantastic, but it's a difficult and energy-consuming, time-consuming task. So of course the temptation is there. I think I'll just let this go. Now, it doesn't matter if your book is not perfect when it's published, because we're human, and really I'd find it difficult to think that anything we do is perfect, and perfection changes and things change over time. But it should be in a version that makes you feel, I'm happy for it to be printed in that version. Now, a few words about using apps and things. So we have apps that can help you with grammar and things like that. Don't be frightened if you take text out of your book, text that looks absolutely fine. Maybe you're editing and you put a comma in and you want to cut and paste it out of your track changes document just to see, well, does this look okay when the track changes aren't showing? And then your app might start underlining this, that, and the other. And you might find if you click on the underlines that the app is making suggestions. And you read the suggestions, and the suggestions are absolutely fine, but they might not be your style of writing. So both might be correct. What you've written might be perfectly correct, and the app is suggesting something that is also perfectly correct, but it might not be quite right for your book. So it's good to check grammar, of course, and good to check spelling. But one good way of doing it, so that's fine to use an app and put it in there for things that you're unsure of, but be a little bit wary of the underlines and the suggestions that are made, and make sure that they are really good for your book if you decide to use them, and really appropriate for your book if you decide to use them. You can look things up on the internet. So where you have a question about certain words or phrases, you can put them into the internet and do a search and then see what that comes up with, because that might give you a more definitive answer than an app. So you can use all the tools in your toolbox to write your book, to help you write your book, as in to check things that you've written. But then at the end of the day, it's going to be your book, and there are going to be some things that no app covers, and there are going to be some things that the internet might not cover either. And that's absolutely fine, because if you think about language evolves, and sometimes we have to make new language a little bit, not completely, otherwise people just might not know what that language is, but we might need to tweak the language a little bit for it to really work for our book. That is not the case for every book. There are certain books, for example, I write some fantasy books. For the fantasy books, this sort of thing is far more important than for a non-fiction book. A non-fiction book really just might not need any new language. Sometimes we need older language. So languages change, as I mentioned, and as you will know too. And sometimes we might be writing something that is kind of set in the past. And if it's set in the past, it would and could be very appropriate to use words that did exist at one point in time, but they're not really used in speech, writing that much anymore. And that happens very quickly when we look at people's lives. We look at the decades passing by, language changes very quickly. But to pull a word from the past can be perfectly fine. And you can even do that for books that are set more in current time. That's okay to do too if you want to revive a word, or indeed if there is no current word that serves the purpose, but there was a word that existed once that does serve the purpose that you need it for, then go ahead and use it. Dictionaries exist for a reason, so people can use dictionaries and look the words up online and they will find the meaning anyway. There's never any harm in people learning more. And you can move language on yourself a little bit, perhaps not in a way where it's contrived, not because we're forcing it, but sometimes it's necessary. It's necessary for what you're writing, and like I say, not for every book. So these were a few tips about writing. What I would add for sequels and prequels, those kind of books in your series, it is more complicated. Editing is more complicated. So you will have to have your other book or books on hand. So you'll have to have the first book or the next book, whichever you wrote first, you'll have to have other books on hand. So if you've written 3 in a series and you're coming to write the 4th, you may need all of your first 3 books to hand when you're editing your first book. Editing sequels, prequels, those kind of books it's a difficult task. Editing your first book is also probably going to feel like that, but certainly the further books, it is harder. And you may hit stages where you think, really, is it worth it? Is it worth me doing this? So when you hit stages like that, take a break. I don't mean maybe a 2-week, 1 month or 2-month break, although sometimes that's what happens in life and we just need to go with that and pick up again when we can. But take a break, half an hour, 1 hour, whatever. don't push yourself to the point where you get burnt out, because once you're burnt out, you can't do anything. And writing and editing and all of that, proofreading, is extremely energy intensive. And we can underestimate that while we're, trying to push on with it, getting things done. We have maybe deadlines, our own deadlines, maybe publisher deadlines, but we have to be in a fit state to do the work. And so make sure to replenish often and give yourself the time to bring the energy back up so that you can handle these extremely energy intensive tasks. So thank you for sharing this time with me today. I know you'll be busy, so I very, very much appreciate it. And also, I hope that this video has been super useful, and do let me know in the comments. And before we go, I will show you 3 of my books. So we have the Book of Stamps, with my name there, Vidya Math. And then we have 2 of the same series. So we have the Luminosity of Crystals and Dimensions of the Heart. So 2 stories in that book. And we have the Luminosity of Energy, which is the sequel to the Luminosity of Crystals. These books are available in paperback and on Kindle worldwide. So you can pick them up wherever you are. And I'm going to wish you a fantastic day, and I hope to come back again soon to see you. And meanwhile, look after yourselves and take care. Bye.